Welcome back. During the week, the UK's Home Secretary, Ms. Priti Patel, announced the UK will be prioritising access for high-skilled workers from around the world. The new system, she says, will assign points for specific skills, qualifications, salaries or professions and only give visas to those who have enough points. And this means skilled workers will need to meet a criteria, including specific skills and the ability to speak English. Now, the European Union says it plans to tighten procedures for getting a Schengen visa for Nigerians, as the country is failing to play its part in the return and readmission of its nationals staying illegally in Europe. The EU spokesperson for Foreign Affairs and Security Policy, Virginie Batu-Henriksen, says the EU may introduce several measures to make it more difficult for Nigerians to get a Schengen visa as a result of the Nigerian government's non-cooperation. But Nigerians may not be the only citizens or the highest number of citizens overstaying their visas in Europe. Back in 2016, EU officials admitted they had no way of systematically identifying and tracking the more than 250,000 people who had overstayed their visas in various countries. And since the 26 countries in the Schengen zone do not operate or share a centralized database, visa overstays account for the majority of illegal migrants in Europe, and it's quite hard to track that. It would be easy to assume, therefore, that more of those who overstay their visas are from Europe. So let's bring in Foreign Affairs analyst, Mr. Collins Weke, to take a look at this. He joins us from Brussels. Mr. Weke, thank you for joining us on Diplomatic Channel.
My pleasure to be with you, Amara. Thank you for having me.
Now, this announcement sounds very much like the one from the US a few weeks ago. Here, the EU is saying non-cooperation from the Nigerian government is the reason why they will be thinking about restricting visas on Nigerians. But it's the same, people do overstay their visas in the UK. And from our own study, we found out that many of those who overstay their visas in European Union countries are European Union citizens themselves. What do you make of this?
Well, what I make of this is that there have been quite some progress in terms of making the rules and the criteria not only clearer, but also trying one way or the other to make it more humane and fairer. But of course, a lot still needs to be done. I acknowledge the fact that the EU is doing what they need to do, especially the Schengen group of countries, whereby they are making the rules, adjusting them, of course, tightening the belt, and so on and so forth. That is their exclusive responsibility. Now, it is after they have done that, indeed, it turns out that, the Nigerian government, represented by the embassies and high commissions up and down the Schengen countries are not doing their own part. That is where the issue comes in. But I think it's important to correct one impression. And that is the impression that relates to the Nigerian population, that many Nigerians overstay their welcome in Europe. That is not actually correct. What is correct is that a tiny minority of Nigerians do overstay, just like many other. But because of the population of Nigeria, it springs in the eyes and make it look as if Nigeria is the only country, overstaying their stay in Europe. They're overstaying their visa, rather. Now, going back to whether the Nigerian government is cooperating or not, no, I do not think it is absolutely correct to make that assertion, because I am aware of situations where Nigerian government receives Nigerian citizens that are billed to be repatriated. The first question they ask is, what is the basis upon which this repatriation is taking place? It does look like the EU government, specifically the Schengen countries, would want a situation where they bring in somebody to the Nigerian embassy, no question asked, the Nigerian embassy, gives them the go-ahead to repatriate the person. Well, that used to be the case in the past, but right now they have learned that that is not the right way to go about it.
Yeah, and it does appear, that this is a gang up against Nigerians. First it was the United States, and now you have European countries or the European Union saying that, because Nigerians are overstaying their visa. And as you rightly point out, Nigerians are not the only ones overstaying their visa, and it's just a small fraction. But But even then, even EU officials have admitted back in 2016 that they have no way of determining, systematically identifying and tracking some of these people who are overstaying their visas. I mean, how do they track from country to country people who are overstaying their visas? Would it be wrong then for these countries and for the bloc to label Nigeria as part of the problem of their societies, because they're pinning this on, because of the stabilization of society, they're pinning this on crime and so on. They're saying it is because of these foreigners who have been overstaying their visas. They are being a burden on our security and social system.
Well, I really sincerely hope that we are not dealing with a situation where Nigeria, becomes a clear target of EU countries, Schengen, space, for example, where they single them out in this manner, because that would be wrong. And indeed, the reality on the ground really doesn't say that Nigerians constitute a serious security, problem for the EU. I do not know, beside the isolated cases of, a Nigerian caught in an aircraft trying to, use some bombs implanted inside his shoes.
That was a one-off.
Yeah, that's a one-off. Beside that, I do not know of any situation where a Nigerian out here in Europe has been found wanting for terrorist activities. So you see, this is misplaced. Now, the only thing I can see in front of me is a situation where the European countries are wanting to send a message to, their voters that they are, tightening immigration, and they are using Nigeria one way or the other as, a scapegoat to send a message that, yes, we are tough on immigration. That is unnecessary. And let us not forget that migration in itself is not a negative thing. Migration is as old as the world, and migration will continue, but it needs to be managed in a manner that is fair and the rules are clear.
So the major problem here is not migration, it is illegal migration. And I do understand, why these countries are harping on this. They want to stop encouraging people from making that move from overstaying visas and, sitting in countries where they have no legal rights to be sitting in. But what would be a better approach, to curbing this?
Well, the better approach would have to be holistic. And I think it's a long journey in terms of, having to renew the entire migration architecture with clear roles and responsibilities spelled out. Migration policies and rules and criteria need to be clearer, like I said earlier, but they also need to be fair. We have seen from the results of recent policies that no matter how high the European Union plans to build a wall around their borders around the Union, that people will still always come in. Sometimes they get more desperate, take the high sea, and lives are lost. So it has to be holistic in terms of, number one, identifying what the low-hanging fruits are. I think the European Union, especially the Schengen countries, are beginning to do that with the clear rules that they are now putting up to make it more difficult and more objective in assessing the applications. That's number one. Number two, we also need to examine the development assistance that they send to Africa. Nigeria specifically, they need to see it from the point of view of national interest. National interest in the sense that when Europe supports, job creation initiatives back in Africa, yes, they are helping the youth and the government of Africa, but they are also helping themselves, because one way or the other, they are helping to prevent such a desperation that leads to migration. And now also, of course, the blame, we need to rest it on the laps of the African governments, Nigerian government in this case, that have not provided the youth with enough perspective, more jobs and so on and so forth. But I believe that if they start with, a fair and just and clear criteria, that will go a long way. And then African government need to sit up as well.
Yeah, so many questions popping in my head, especially concerning that 90 million euros that the EU promised Nigeria last year for various projects. Mr. Weke, always a pleasure speaking with you. Thank you again for joining us on Diplomatic Channel.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me.
This is where we end the program this week. As always, I look forward to hearing from you. Remember, you can watch repeats on youtube.com/channelsweb and keep in touch at Amarachi_Ubani on Twitter and Amarachi Ubani on Instagram. I'll see you next time.